This morning we have the privilege to hear from Roland Warren. Roland holds an undergraduate degree from Princeton University and an MBA from Wharton. He has 20 years of experience working for companies such as IBM, PepsiCo, and Goldman Sachs. Following that, he took a position as president of the National Fatherhood Initiative. From there, he became the CEO of CareNet. CareNet is a network of 1,100 pregnancy resource centers. It is an outgrowth of the Christian Action Council, which was formed in the mid-1970s in the wake of Roe v. Wade by men such as Dr. Harold Brown, Dr. Everett Koop, and Dr. Francis Schaeffer. I'm always encouraged to know that there were men who right away began to take leadership in the life movement, and I'm proud to say that Roland Warren stands on their shoulders. Roland regularly appears in the media and is a frequent speaker. Please join me in welcoming him here this morning.
Good morning. Whoa, let's see here. Thank you very much, Dennis. I appreciate that. Good morning to all of you. I need a little more. I have low self-esteem, so I need a little more enthusiastic. Good. Thank you very much. Delighted to be with you. I'm always anxious to get back to Texas. My wife's a Texan, which she reminds me of. I just asked her yesterday. I said, "Are you a Texan?" And she hasn't lived in Texas for 36 years, and she said, "Of course." So it just when you're from Texas, you're always from Texas. So I kind of glom on. I'm sort of connected to her and connected to you in that way. It's an interesting thing because I've been with CareNet for about 6 years, and it's a mission and a vision that is near and dear to my heart, because what we're really seeking to do is create a culture where women and men faced with pregnancy decisions are transformed by the gospel of Jesus Christ and empowered to choose life for their unborn children and an abundant life for their families. It's a real key thing in terms of the work that we're doing. As Dennis said, it's 1,100 network of 1,100 pregnancy centers in the U.S. and Canada that are really focused on this. I'm delighted to co-labor with them. And the thing I love about our focus is really we're not just focused on what to do about the abortion issue, but we're also focused on why there's an abortion issue to begin with. So what I really want to talk to you about today is really this whole notion of life in a different context, and hopefully help you see even more why the role of men in particular is so significant in terms of the issue and in terms of the solution. Now, if you've spent more than 20 seconds with anybody from CareNet, you've probably heard them say, "I'm not just pro-life, I'm pro-abundant life. I'm pro-abundant life." And it's not just something that we say as sort of a catchphrase or to try to be different, but it's actually very much based on Scripture, based on John 10:10, where Christ said, "I came that you might have life and then have that life abundantly." I came that you might have life and then have that life abundantly. And it's interesting because, Christ was obviously talking to people who were alive when he said that. And therefore, he must have been talking about something a little different than just physical life. He was talking about not only physical life, but he was talking about a unique type of life in particular. So, there's two words in the Greek that really kind of help us understand this. One is bios, which is where we get the word biology in terms of physical life, but there's also another word, zoe. And it's interesting because when you see those two words together, one is a physical life and the other is a spiritual life, a unique type of spiritual life that only comes from a connection with Christ. So you've got bios, which comes at conception, and then you have zoe, which comes when you have that new creation, you become a follower of Christ. And the way I try to think about this and to help you kind of connect it, for me, it's about heartbeats that are heaven-bound. Heartbeats that are heaven-bound. Now, that's significant to me because from my standpoint, if we're going to be pro-life, as Christians, we should want more. So you can be an atheist and be pro-life, but you can't be an atheist and be pro-abundant life. And Christ said, "I came that you might have life and have it abundantly." So it seems to me that when we look at the life issue, we should want for the unborn what Christ said he came to give to all folk. That would be y'all and all y'all. I think is that proper? I want to make sure I conjugated that properly. Which is abundant life. Now, from my standpoint, one of the ways to kind of walk through this to kind of help you connect with it, I use this kind of structure. It's a house, and let's say we're going to build a house. There's a roof on a house, and this roof is a pro-abundant life roof, and you need at least 2 pillars to hold up that roof. And the first pillar is family. And when I came to CareNet, God downloaded a perspective to me, and it was this notion about family. And he took me back to the birth of Christ, which is in the first chapter of the first book of the New Testament. And you know the story, I'm sure, right? Here's Mary facing an unplanned pregnancy from a human perspective. Hopes and dreams for her life and her life with Joseph that did not include a child at this time in this way. And the angel comes to her and says, you're going to have a child. Now, here's the interesting thing. Mary had all this uncertainty. I mean, what's going to happen? What's Joseph going to say? What's my family going to say? How am I going to take care of this? All the uncertainty. And yet she didn't focus on the uncertainty of what she didn't know. She focused on the certainty of what she did know. That this was a life, and not a life worth sacrificing, but a life worth sacrificing for. And she said, what? Let it be unto me as you have said. And what God gave me, even before I came to care, was this notion that essentially that's what we're trying to encourage women to do, to tap into their inner Mary, to ascribe to themselves both the virtue and the character of Mary. And despite the uncertainty of what they don't know, to focus on the certainty of what they do know. There's a life growing inside me, and it's not a life worth sacrificing, but a life worth sacrificing for. So you see that. Now, it's interesting because God did something there. Because what did he do in order to make sure that Mary's unplanned pregnancy wasn't a crisis pregnancy? What did he do? Well, he sent an angel to Joseph. And Joseph was a man. And when you're a man, you have a plan. And so Joseph was a man with a plan. And the angel said, man, I got a new plan for you. See what I'm saying? And he said, listen, my plan is this. I'm going to put her away quietly. See, because back then you couldn't put the baby away, so you put the woman and the baby away. What does that sound like to you? Sound familiar? In a cultural context, right? But the angel came to Joseph and said, no, you're a man with a plan, but I got a new plan for you, man, and it is this. I need you to be a husband to her and a father to the child growing inside of her. Husband to her and a father to the child growing inside of her. And what did Joseph say? He said essentially the same thing that Mary said. He said, let it be unto me as you have said, and he chose life too. And when Herod wanted to kill Jesus and put Mary at risk, who did the angel go to? Did he go to Mary? No, went to Joseph. I need you to provide and to protect. Husband to you, father to the child growing. Husband to her, father to the child growing inside of her. Provide and protect. One man, 2 missions. See, there's always been a role for men when it comes to unplanned pregnancy. God has a design. He has a high idea. And it's interesting because God used this perfect structure, this perfect relationship. See, Mary and Joseph were not just kind of kicking it, as some of the young folks say, right? They weren't engaged. They were connected in a covenant relationship. See, that's why he was going to divorce her quietly. He was going to divorce her quietly. And God brought Jesus into this relationship that accomplished his purpose without violating his covenant, his high idea, the high idea of how he wants children to come to the world. And so from my perspective, it gave me this insight. I said, my gosh, that I've got my marching orders. I've got my business plan. I have my ministry model. It's in the first chapter of the first book of the New Testament. After God was silent for over 400 years, in the first chapter of the first book of the New Testament, he gave us what we're supposed to do. And my observation as a new person coming into this is that we've lost part of that narrative. We lost part of that narrative and part of that response in terms of how we've been dealing with the issue. See, because the Holy Family was holy family. A father and mother united in marriage, loving each other, loving their child, and loving God. That's the high ideal. It seems to me that if you're going to be pro-abundant life, that's the high idea you should strive for. God's design for family. God's design for family. And part of the challenge here, from my perspective, has to do with the fact that we actually delinked aspects that are in that story in terms of our response. You see, there's an order in Scripture. What was the first thing that the angel told Joseph to do? He said, what? Do not be afraid to take her as your wife. In other words, the first thing that the angel did was he affirmed God's design, the sanctity of marriage and family, before he gave him the notion about the sanctity of life. See, in my humanity, the first thing I would have done, I said, listen, Joseph, protect that Christ child. She's carrying the Christ child. Protect the baby. No, that's not the first thing the angel said. The first thing the angel said was, do not be afraid to take her as your wife. Do not be afraid to take her as your wife. So he affirmed the sanctity of marriage and family before he affirmed the sanctity of life. And so I submit to you that we shouldn't be talking about the sanctity of life issue without talking about the sanctity of marriage and family issue together. See, here's the thing that you got to understand. There were two things happened when Roe v. Wade was decided, and we only talked about one of them. One of them obviously was abortion, which had been happening in some form for a long time. But there was another thing that happened that specifically affects men, and it was this. What the law did is it delinked fatherhood and motherhood in the womb. So now legally, men become fathers at birth and women become mothers at conception. Let that settle in. That's huge. Now I don't have enough time to kind of unpack how that's impacted our culture, but it is absolutely huge. See, God has a design. See, he connected fatherhood and motherhood in the womb, and the baby is a living reflection of that, because the child is a reflection of the unity of God's design. And what God has joined together, nobody should put us under. We know that. And so we de-link that, and when you de-link it, guess what you do? See, in God's economy, you're not supposed to be a father unless you're what? Husband, and you're not supposed to be a mother unless you're what? A wife. So that means he also de-linked husbandhood and wifehood in the womb as well. Do you understand? It's enormous impact. It's why we are where we are, and why men often sit on the sideline, because the law has told them for 40 years we should. And my call to us as the community of men is to step through that, step beyond that, and step over that. Because just like Joseph, God has a call for us around this issue, specifically. And you know, there's other reason that this makes sense. The other reason this makes sense, I'm a business guy by training, so, you know, there's got to be a chart. So I'll give you one early in the morning. This chart talks about the support needed by mothers and children. At the bottom, you see time, and then you see type, physical, emotional, and spiritual support. Remember the story of the woman at the well and how Jesus engaged her, what he connected with her physically, emotionally, spiritually, and socially, right? The transformation. What was the turning point in that story, by the way, when he told her what? To call her husband. Think about that. Call her husband, right? So you've got type and you have time. And you see the B and the C, that's really conception to birth, and then it's 10 years old, 18 years old in terms of the child. Now, this line basically says that the support needed by mothers and children increases over time. Increases over time. It's different, but it increases over time. And this shaded area says that it's basically covered that way. Now, here's the thing. God is wise. He has a design to make sure that mothers and children get the support that they need over time. It's called husbands and fathers. And in fact, 86% of the women who have abortions are unmarried. 86% of the women that have abortions are unmarried. And what we also know from a survey that we did, we asked women who had abortions, who were you more likely to talk to? And we gave them a list of folk they could talk to, their girlfriend, their best friend, their mother, all kinds of folks, abortion providers, everybody. Guess who was number one that they talked to before their abortion? The guy who got her pregnant. And then we asked, who was the most influential in your decision to abort? Guess who was number one again? The guy who got her pregnant. Now, a lot of you business folks or do business or in the marketplace. If you wanted to do business with somebody and say, listen, I'm the decision maker. My business, my choice. But you see Joe over there in the corner? I talk to Joe about every important business decision. He's incredibly influential in terms of who I do business with. What would you do? You'd want a meeting with Joe. Now, if you look at how we've built our entire response to the life issue, we are talking to everybody except Joe. Does that make sense? So do you see why I said you can't talk about the marriage and family, the sanctity of life issue without talking about the sanctity of marriage and family issue? See, we should have said from the beginning when Roe v. Wade was decided that we believe that children should have fathers and mothers from the point of conception on. And that abortion is an assault on the sanctity of life. Imagine if we would have said that when Roe v. Wade was decided. You could have heard a pin drop in the culture. Say it today. Say it in some churches today. See, so we seeded ground on marriage and family because we framed the issue based on a paradigm that was not consistent with what's right there anchored in Scripture. And my challenge to all of us is to go back. This isn't something new. This is something very old. And it's anchored in the very faith that we carry with us day by day. So 86% of the women who have abortions, right, are unmarried. So if you really want to reduce abortions, guess what you have to do? You have to build a marriage culture. And if you don't build a marriage culture, you're not going to be able to reduce abortions. It's just business. Now, I'm in the pregnancy center business. See that little teal there in the corner? That's pregnancy centers. Amazing work that pregnancy centers do. Amazing first step from conception to birth. Reaching somebody at their point of need. Offering them compassion, hope, and help. Amazing work. I'm just blessed to be involved in that. But there's a problem. See, you see that yellow part? That's missing support. See, so while we're in the pregnancy center, loving her up, and basically helping her see all the support she has from conception to birth, guess what's happening? The other side is reminding her of all the support she doesn't have after that. This is about 9 months and 1 second. And she's making a decision between conception and birth about what support she has after birth. And to the degree that she can't figure out how she's going to fill that missing support, she's much more likely to have the abortion. And I know that firsthand. See, when I was in college at Princeton, the other part that's not in my story is that I got my girlfriend pregnant. I'm still trying to figure out how that happened, but that's science. Anyway, and when she went to Princeton Student Services, Health Services rather, to get the pregnancy test, the nurse administers a test, brings it back without missing a beat, and says to my wife, listen, you're pregnant, of course you're going to have an abortion. And my wife says, well, no, I want to get married. I want to have my baby. And the nurse says, well, how are you going to graduate from Princeton with a baby? And she says, well, no, I want to have my baby. It seems like it makes a whole lot of sense. She said, well, what do you want to become when you graduate? I mean, what do you want to do? She said, well, I want to become a doctor. She said, oh my gosh, you're going to try to graduate from Princeton with a baby and become a doctor with a baby? I mean, it doesn't seem like it makes a whole lot of sense. What was she talking to my wife about? Her hopes and dreams, all that yellow area. All that yellow area. But what the nurse didn't know, that my wife did know, was that she had someone who said, look, I'm going to be a husband to you, and I'm going to be a father to our child growing inside of you. And my wife's been practicing medicine for almost 30 years now. Do you see? Do you see? So the issue that we're dealing with every day is right there on one chart. That's the issue. That's the issue. Now, lest folks get twisted, I always try to make this point. It's not just about whether this woman marries that guy. He might not be marriageable. She might not be marriageable. But you see, she's come to the pregnancy center or she's come to the abortion clinic because she's delinked fatherhood, motherhood, and sex and marriage consistent with God's design, because that's what the culture has required of her. And she's walked in the fullness of the culture. And that's why she's facing the consequence of that. And so if we have her in a pregnancy center, we love her up, and that stuff is still delinked and we send her back out into the culture, what do you think happens too often? You see, our sign can't say, thank you, come again. Our sign has to say, thank you, don't come again. Not to be served, but to be service to others. See, the difference here is between a transactional approach to this issue and a transformational approach to this issue. See, because if you have a transactional approach to this issue, it's basically consumer, it's just business. So if she comes in with a child, she keeps her child, and then she comes back 18 months later with a new crisis and a new guy, and our sign says, thank you, come again. And then she comes back with a new, you get what I'm talking about. Now, if you are Burger King, Wendy's, Walmart, Chick-fil-A, that's great, because that's a transactional business. And oh, by the way, if you're Planned Parenthood, no problem there. They're not in the transformational business, they're in the transactional business. That's all it is. It's just a business. They believe that they're selling a morally neutral consumer product that women want and need. It's just business. So if we're not focused on what causes transformation in people's lives, what will cause a transformation in her life, then what we end up looking like is just sort of a Christian version, so to speak, of the Planned Parenthood model. And I have to tell you, that's a big, big challenge. Repeat clients. See, we're not called to that. We are called to have a relationship-based, covenant-focused ministry. Because you know who had a relationship-based, covenant-focused ministry? Christ. See, he knew something about the woman at the well. She was going to need water tomorrow. See, she was there the hottest part of the day, all alone, at risk, vulnerable. And he knew also that her being there that way was tied to her no husband problem. And the woman that's coming to a pregnancy center or a Planned Parenthood, the reason she's there is tied to her no husband problem. And Jesus knew that she was going to be back tomorrow, but guess what? He wasn't going to be there. So he wasn't in the transaction business. She thought this was about bottled water. He said, no, this isn't about bottled water, me digging a well near your house. This is about you being transformed by the gospel of Jesus Christ. He wasn't saying, thank you, come again. And what happened? She's transformed. The whole community is transformed. You remember the story? So if we're going to be pro-abundant life people, that means we have to be in the transformation piece, transformational ministry model. And in order to do that, there's some other things that need to happen. So from my perspective, it's critical that we build this first pillar so that even if she doesn't marry that guy, that her mind has been transformed so she relinks fatherhood, motherhood, sex, and marriage and God's design for these things. So that the next time she has an opportunity to have sex, the next time he has an opportunity to have sex, that he does it by viewing it through that lens. If you're a married person and you're not having sex with somebody who's not your wife, well, why is that? It's because when a sexual opportunity comes up, you view that through the lens of fatherhood, motherhood, sex, and marriage consistent with God's design. It doesn't get through the filter. Isn't that what we want for her? Isn't that the value set that we want her to communicate to her children? Isn't that the value set that we want for him? It is if we're not in a transactional business, but we're in a transformational ministry. And we've lost some of that narrative. And you don't get there if you're not focused on God's design for family. You don't get there. You can't. There's no on-ramp to get you there. Okay? So that's the first piece. And it's interesting because what happens? The woman's much more likely to give the child bios, right? If she has someone who says, I'll be a husband to you and a father to the child growing inside of you. So God's design for family. Now, there's a second piece to this, and the second pillar. And it's really God's call to discipleship. Now, here's the thing. Is helping someone who's facing an unplanned pregnancy or at risk for an unplanned pregnancy, is that a good work? Is that a good work? Yes, right? Well, all good works should equal discipleship. Water for the thirsty, food for the hungry, clothes for the naked, compassion for the pregnant. But here's the problem. Most Christians do not view the life issue as a discipleship issue primarily. They either view it through a political lens or through a material lens. If you talk to a typical Christian, you say, are you pro-life? And they say, yes. And you say, well, what are your pro-life bona fides? Prove it to me. And they say, I voted for this candidate. Or I provided this kind of material support. And I would submit to you that although the abortion issue has a material component and has a political aspect, it's not primarily either one of those things. It's primarily a discipleship issue. Why? Because it's a good work, and all good works are supposed to equal discipleship. And oh, by the way, this call is the Great Commission, which is in the last chapter of the first book of the New Testament. So the family's in the first chapter of the first book of the New Testament, and the discipleship's in the last chapter of the first book of the New Testament. Makes it pretty easy. Now, why are we viewing this issue through a material and political lens? See, I really feel like we've been pushed into that perspective because of the narrative that's been put out into the public square and one that we've pushed forward. But see, I went back to Scripture, and I remember the time when Jesus was given that coin, and he was asked, should we pay taxes? And he looked at the coin and said, what? Render unto Caesar what is Caesar, and unto God what is God's. And what was Caesar's realm? What did Caesar care about? He cared about the political and the material. So it wasn't that we aren't supposed to be involved in the political and the material. It's that we're supposed to put the priority someplace else. Now, here's the thing. See, if you're a disciple maker, you can't be a disciple maker without focus on the focus on the material. Why? 1 John 3:17 says what? If you have material goods and your brother and sister's in need and you don't have pity, then the love of God is not in you, which means what? You're not a disciple maker. So you can't be a disciple maker without focusing on material support, but you can focus on material support without focusing on discipleship. That's called social services. It's called WIC. I don't care how many kids you come with. I'll give you your program. I'll give you whatever. Do you see? It's transactional, not transformational, because discipleship is transformational. And oh, by the way, you cannot be a disciple maker without being involved in the political. Why? See, God is involved in the affairs of man, and he organizes the affairs of man. What? Through a political process. And as we know, governments have an amazing ability to be unjust, especially to who? Especially to the vulnerable. And so if we're going to be people of the book, if we're going to be disciple makers, then we have to be involved in the political process so that the political structure does not have the ability to hurt the vulnerable. So again, you can be involved in the political without doing discipleship, but you can't be involved in discipleship without being involved in the political. Do you see? But it's the order that's there. And I would say specifically that if Christians don't start to think about this issue this way, we're never going to have the success that we need. And moreover, pastors are never going to be engaged. I was in Boerne, Texas a couple of months ago, and I was talking to a group of pastors. And they're all pro-life pastors. I asked the question, I said, how many of you became pastors because you wanted to overturn Roe v. Wade? Raise your hand. Nobody raised their hand. I said, how many of you became pastors because you wanted to end abortion in your lifetime? Raise your hand. Nobody raised their hand. I said, how many of you became pastors because you felt called to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ and to make disciples for Jesus Christ? Guess what happened? Everybody raised their hand. See, so if this issue is not viewed as a discipleship issue, then it becomes something outside the church, which we can assist, but not something inside the church, which is a ministry component that we must be involved in. The life issue is a discipleship issue primarily. That's why I want to submit to you. The life issue is a discipleship issue primarily. And if you take anything else away from this, I want you to really think about that and pray about that, because if it is a discipleship issue primarily, then you can't afford not to be involved in it. I think I did a double negative there. Be involved in it. Because if you're not, then you're not following the Great Commission. And plus, our whole faith, our entire faith started with an unplanned pregnancy from a human perspective. You ever think about that? So if you're not into this issue, then I don't know what, we need to check your card. I mean, our entire faith started with an unplanned pregnancy from a human perspective. The other reason why it's so important for the church and people of the church to be involved in this issue is because we have another problem. See, the work I do with pregnancy centers, pregnancy centers can do evangelism, which leads to conversion. But we're not called to make converts, we're called to make disciples. And what happens too often is that person leaves the pregnancy center and ends up going back to the culture. And that's where we get this situation where they're back again. See, because discipleship is not just a biblical construct, it's a principle of replication. So if you're a parent, your children are your disciples. If you're a gang leader, like this gentleman here, he threw me a couple signs when I was up here. It's all right, don't turn your back on that one. Then your gang members are your disciples. It's a principle of replication. So she was a disciple of the culture. If we send her back to the culture, if we send him back to the culture, what do you think happens? Replication. That's why they need to go not back to the culture, but to the church for ongoing support and discipleship. That's the missing link. Each and every one of us has an ability to step into that need in some way, shape, or form. And that's part of my call to you. Yes, we want your treasure. Doors will be locked. No, I'm just kidding. Right? But this also is about your time and your talent. Someone's facing a pregnancy decision. They need to become a disciple of Jesus Christ. And each and every one of us in this room has something that we can do to help them in that process. Why? Because only by becoming a disciple of Jesus Christ do they have that transforming power that leads to a heartbeat that's heaven-bound. And this is the church's work. You know, one of the things that God put on my heart early on was James 1:27 talks about religion that God our Father finds as pure and faultless as what? To care for the orphans and widows in their distress, right? And to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. And it was interesting because when I thought about that, what was an orphan when this was written? Well, it was a child without a father, and what was a widow? It was typically a mother without a husband. And so what we have in our communities and what we have in our pregnancy centers is cultural orphans and widows. And instead of the husband and the father being dead, it's the husband and the father, proverbial husband and father, saying to the mother and the child, "You're dead to me." And so, any of y'all interested in religion that's pure and faultless in God's sight? I'm just checking. Anybody? That should be y'all and all y'all. Then you're called to this issue. Because we have cultural orphans and widows. And the other thing that we have is this transforming power of the gospel of Jesus Christ for that father and that husband, potential, right, who's stepped away to have a Lazarus moment and be brought back to life. See, you may have, like me, grown up without a father. It's difficult to be what you don't see. It's difficult to give what you didn't have. And maybe you've been a father for years and years and you could come alongside a young man. Maybe he's got a hole in his soul in the shape of his dad. And he's so terrified that he'll be what he saw that he just runs. You've been married 35 years, been a father for whatever. Can you come alongside somebody? Are we going to move outside of our comfort zone to do that? That's where the church steps in. Again, it can't do what a husband and a father would do for a woman facing an unplanned pregnancy. But this verse tells me there's a clear call. And the other issue is that 54% of the women who have abortions profess to be either Catholic or Protestant. And on the research we did, we found that nearly 4 out of 10 were attending church at least monthly at the time of their first abortion. They're in your church. In church on Sunday, in the abortion clinic on Monday. See, I tell people all the time, we need to overturn Roe v. Wade in our own churches, in our own pews. This is the log in our eye versus the speck in the culture's eye. And just do some math, 40%, 1 million abortions, that's 400,000. The average abortion is $500. Do the math on that. It's $200 million that Christians are funding the abortion industry year after year after year. We're marching here, marching there, trying to defund Planned Parenthood. How about this? How about Christians just stop having abortions? You think that'll impact the bottom line for the abortion providers? You better believe it will. And that's doable. But only if we start thinking about this issue as a discipleship issue. Only if we start addressing it from the perspective of what we can do as the church, not just in a political and material sense, but in a discipleship sense, the transforming that needs to happen there. So what you see here is these two pillars, and guess what? Discipleship is the key to Zoe. So you've got bios in terms of God's design for family. You've got Zoe in terms of God's call to discipleship. That's what it means to be pro-abundant life. Now, as I kind of close up here, let me tell you why I am so focused on the need for change here. I'm a black man. Note to file. And when I first started doing this work, I'd hear these stories about, the similarities between slavery and abortion and that stuff, and people would make those parallels, vulnerable people, all that kind of stuff. And I started to think about this, and I thought about the abolitionist movement. And their whole focus was abolishing slavery.
abolishing slavery. And their goal was to abolish slavery. And from my perspective, as I thought through it, I thought, they had the wrong goal. That's the wrong goal. See, that's a tactic or a strategy, but not a goal. See, their goal should have been that black folk have an opportunity for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which is enshrined in our Declaration of Independence. Their goal should have been that black folks have an opportunity for the blessings of liberty, which is enshrined in our Constitution. And in order for them to have the blessings of liberty and life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, they can't be slaves. Therefore, we can't have slavery. Now that they're not slaves, what should we be trying to ensure? Well, they have all these things. Well, how do we ensure this for ourselves? Well, we engage in civil society. We engage in commerce. We worship together. Do you see? We strengthen our, you see what we do? So you never could have had Jim Crow. None of those things would have happened. You can have that if your goal is to abolish slavery, but you can never have those things if your goal was anchored properly in the Declaration of Independence and our Constitution. And by the way, this was a movement largely led by Christians, people of the book, with a wrong goal. And I started to think about the life issue and the pro-life movement, because I think that we are heading in the same direction. See, you talk to different folks and say, well, the goal of the pro-life movement is to overturn Roe v. Wade. And, I started to think about this. I said, well, okay, if we overturn Roe v. Wade, to what end? Are we just going to have a sea of single mother homes as far as the eye can see? And I'll tell you something. I've kind of run out of time here, and I know I got work to do, so I'm going to skip to the end here. So you shifted to rights language, which is perfect for what? A constitutional amendment. So what I'd do if I was on the other side, look, it gets overturned, I'd get me a film crew, I'd go to a woman who's facing an unplanned pregnancy, and I'd walk with her as she went up to the door of a church, maybe your church, and she knocked on the door and tried to get support. And if she got turned away, then I'd take her to the next church, and the next church, and the next church. And then I'd follow her all the way to that back alley abortion. And then I'd film that. I'd probably get an Oscar. And there will be a hue and cry in this nation, not for a return to Roe v. Wade, but for a constitutional amendment guaranteeing the right to abortion. Do you see? And the only response to that, the only answer to that is the church. Because on the day when Roe v. Wade is overturned, there needs to be an ecumenical response from the church that says, no. We have a ministry on-ramp in our church that's designed to offer compassion, hope, and help for anyone who's at risk for abortion. And we're very, very good at it. We've been doing it a long time. So don't weep because abortion's gone, because we understand how to do that. Life decisions need life support. This is my call to you. My call to each and every one of you as I close, who's facing an unplanned pregnancy, help him step up to tap into his inner Joseph. But then if you're out of that demographic like I am in terms of the ability to, face an unplanned pregnancy, then at a macro level, you've got an opportunity to be a Joseph. See, Joseph's call was not just an individual call, it was a community call, right? Because the angel said, who was he? Son of David, right? Why? That connected Joseph to the community, connected him to the people that Christ was coming to save, the Son of David people, his people. So each and every one of us has an ability to do that and to build a ministry component. That's why I put up the Making Life Disciples ministry, which CareNet does, to enable churches to offer compassion, hope, and help, and each and every one of you have an ability to do that. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Roland. Thank you for reminding us this morning of the way that the Lord has called us to participate in this issue. Gentlemen, we've come a long way. In 1972, we shunned. Gentlemen, it's important for us to come together and have these conversations. It's difficult when we are pursuing truth to see how tangible this really is. This morning, I hope that you can understand that what just happened to us all is that our thinking moved forward, and we got some weapons that we can use to talk about life in a positive way. And we've been reminded to be very vigilant for those opportunities that the Lord puts in our path to step in. So I'm going to mention that they're right here for you. One of them is a tract here, Pro-Abundant Life. Bring this with you, read it, think about it, because this needs to be top of mind for us. The other thing that is there is a card on the 2019 Run for Life. This is not a women's issue either. This is men's issue to get out and run for life, or at least cheer along the way. Well, you know, it's important to participate in events such as this breakfast here this morning, and in the other events that Council for Life sponsors through the years. We need to continue to meet together and talk together so that we take every opportunity that the Lord provides to advance the good work of saving precious young lives. As many of you know, we call our members advocates for life. I would like to remind you that as an advocate for life, you're helping to plant the seeds that bear fruit in the form of decisions for life. Remember and be encouraged that through the determined and thoughtful work of ministries such as those Council for Life supports, that there is now an entire generation that knows that life begins at conception. For most of you who are under 30, your first baby picture was a sonogram taken in the womb. You know, it's hard to believe that the idea that a baby in the womb is any different than a baby who comes out of the womb. It's hard to believe that was ever a question. We don't have far to go. We need to continue this good work, and I know we will. I have witnessed many of you in this room standing up as fathers and husbands. Perfect? No. But no one can expect that we be perfect fathers or perfect advocates for life. I know that some of you also serve on boards of our beneficiaries or serve as volunteers. Some of you have had gentle and pivotal conversations with your friends, with your sons, with your nephews, with people in the community. I hope that you're encouraged this morning to continue to do this work with grace, with love, and with mercy. Please also note that as an advocate for life, the card continues and you have an opportunity to financially support Council for Life. There's a table in the hall where they will accept many forms of payment. I would encourage you to check the box in your card that corresponds to the level of support that best fits with your ability. Your funds will, I assure you, be put to good work. You'll also have an opportunity to visit. I'm going to give you a little bit of your time back this morning. Gentlemen, this morning you did something good. You stood for life. So you've already done something positive here this morning. And we have encouraged each other. I hope that you are encouraged. Gentlemen, have a great rest of the day. Thank you.